He has played a penguin-faced supervillain, a tyrannical cab dispatcher, and one of the meanest bar owners on television, and audiences have loved him for all of it. But the role nobody ever cast him in, the one no studio ever announced, turned out to be the most important part he ever played. At 81 years old, Danny DeVito has spent the last several years saying plainly, in interview after interview, that there has only ever been one woman. Not a co-star. Not a fling. Not a chapter he closed and moved past. One woman. For more than 50 years, through a marriage, 2 separations, and a refusal to ever sign divorce papers. People who only know him as a penguin in Batman Returns, or as Frank Reynolds stumbling through another scheme on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, tend to assume his real life looks something like his characters, loud, chaotic, impossible to pin down. It doesn't. To understand why a 4'10" kid from the Jersey Shore ended up being one of Hollywood's most unlikely love stories, you have to go back to a house above a candy counter, a mother who said something almost nobody would admit out loud, and a body that worked against him from the very beginning. Daniel Michael DeVito Jr. was born on November 17, 1944, at a hospital in Neptune Township, New Jersey, the youngest of 3 children and the only boy. His mother, Julia, was in her 40s by the time he arrived, already raising 2 daughters, and by DeVito's own account she was not expecting, and not necessarily hoping for, a 3rd child. Years later, in an interview reflecting on his life, he recalled that his mother had once said something close to this. She hadn't wanted him, but she had ended up enormously proud of him. It is a strange thing for a child to carry, that particular kind of honesty, but DeVito never seemed to treat it as a wound. He treated it more like a fact of his origin story, the kind of blunt, unsentimental Jersey Shore truth-telling that ran through his whole family. His father, Daniel Sr., moved between small businesses his entire life, a candy counter and luncheonette on the boardwalk, a dry cleaning shop, a pool hall with a few well-worn Brunswick tables. The family was of Italian and Albanian descent, raised Catholic, and lived modestly in Asbury Park, the kind of working-class seaside town where everybody's father did 3 jobs and everybody's mother stretched $1 as far as it would go. DeVito has spoken fondly about that town in later interviews, about the boardwalk, the movie houses, the doo-wop drifting out of jukeboxes, and about a childhood that, despite the lack of money, was full of family dinners, noise, and laughter rather than hardship. What complicated all of it was his body. He was born with a rare genetic disorder called multiple epiphyseal dysplasia, more commonly known as Fairbanks disease, a condition that interferes with the way cartilage and bone develop at the growing ends of the long bones. For most people with the condition, that means joint problems in the hips, knees, and ankles, premature arthritis, and a final adult height that lands somewhere on the shorter end of average. For DeVito, it meant stopping at 4 feet 10 inches exactly, with a head and torso built like a much taller man sitting on legs that simply never caught up. He has talked about how the condition made him an easy target in a neighborhood full of bigger boys, and how being underestimated, mocked, or simply overlooked early on eventually became something he learned to use rather than resent. At 14, worried about the rougher edges starting to creep into his Asbury Park neighborhood, he asked his own parents to send him away to boarding school. They did. He graduated from Oratory Preparatory School in 1962, with no particular plan to become an actor at all. His first calling, strangely enough, was air. After high school he went to work as a cosmetician at his older sister's beauty salon, and a year later enrolled at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York, not because he dreamed of Broadway, but because he wanted to learn more about makeup and cosmetology. It was there, almost by accident, that he discovered he loved being in front of people instead of just making them look good. He fell into acting the way a lot of people in the late 1960s did, sideways, through a theater program, a few odd auditions, and a willingness to take any role that came along. Around that same time, he spent a summer working at the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center in Connecticut, where he met a long-haired aspiring actor named Michael Douglas. Neither one had any money, and neither one knew yet that the other would become a lifelong friend. They ended up sharing a cramped New York apartment on West 89th Street for $75 a month each, splitting the rent and figuring out the city together while they waited for someone, anyone, to cast them in something. Those years were lean in the way most actors' early years are lean. DeVito worked as a parking attendant and took whatever shifts he could find between auditions, while Douglas, unbeknownst to most of the people they knew, was quietly the son of Kirk Douglas and could have leaned on that name far more than he chose to. The two split rent and groceries and commiserated over rejection letters, neither one yet famous enough for anyone to remember the apartment they shared. DeVito took every off-Broadway role he could land, often in tiny experimental productions nobody outside the theater world would ever hear of, including a 1969 play called The Man with the Flower in His Mouth. 2 years later, he landed the role of Martini, a delusional psychiatric patient, in an off-Broadway staging of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It would have been a forgettable credit if not for one thing: Michael Douglas, by then transitioning into producing, was putting together the film adaptation, directed by Milos Forman, and made sure DeVito got to reprise the role on screen in 1975. The film swept 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, and is still considered one of the great films of American cinema. DeVito's screen time was brief, but it put him in rooms he hadn't been in before. Even so, the years right after Cuckoo's Nest was strangely quiet for him professionally. Recognition didn't come instantly, and at one point he even took a stretch of work outside acting entirely, doing whatever paid the bills. He went back to small parts and television guest spots, still waiting for the role that would actually change his life. That role hadn't found him yet by January 17, 1971, the night a 22-year-old Brooklyn-born actress named Rhea Perlman walked into a small theater to support her friend performing in a one-night-only off-Broadway production called The Shrinking Bride. Perlman had grown up in Bensonhurst, the daughter of a Polish immigrant who worked in the toy trade, had studied drama at Hunter College, graduating in 1968, and was waitressing at the Rainbow Room in Rockefeller Center to get by while chasing whatever auditions came her way. She wasn't there that night to scout talent. She was there to be a supportive friend. But somewhere during that single performance, her attention drifted away from the friend she'd come to see and landed on the stocky, energetic actor sharing the stage. He wasn't conventionally leading man material, and that was sort of the point. There was a gravity to him, a comic confidence that filled the small room, without him needing to raise his voice. After the show ended, Perlman didn't wait around for a formal introduction. Asked years later about that night, she has described coming onto him with no hesitation whatsoever, determined to meet him immediately rather than let the moment pass. They went out, talked for hours, and within 2 weeks Perlman had moved into DeVito's Manhattan apartment. There was no lengthy courtship, no careful testing of the waters. Two people who had grown up scraping by, who both understood ambition and rejection in equal measure, recognized something in each other almost instantly, and DeVito has since said he knew within minutes of meeting her that she was the person he wanted to build a life with. They lived together for more than a decade before making it official, not because either one doubted the relationship, but because neither felt the need to rush toward a piece of paper to prove what they already knew. During those years, DeVito kept chasing his breakthrough, picking up small film and television parts, while he and Perlman built a life on 2 modest incomes. It finally arrived in 1978, when he auditioned for a new ABC sitcom about a New York City cab company called Taxi, created by a team of writers fresh off the Mary Tyler Moore Show. According to DeVito's own retelling of the audition, given years later to AARP, he walked into a room full of those celebrated comedy writers, picked up the script, and bluntly asked who had written it before tossing the pages on the table, fully in character as the dispatcher he was reading for. There was a tense, 1-second pause while he wondered if he'd just ruined the whole thing. Then the room burst out laughing. He got the part, and from that point on, by his own account, he could do almost anything in the room and get a laugh. Louis De Palma, the small, mean, endlessly quotable dispatcher who ran the cab garage like his own personal kingdom, became one of the most memorable characters in television history, later ranked by TV Guide as one of the greatest TV characters ever written. DeVito won a Golden Globe and an Emmy for the role. In the show's second season, Perlman joined the cast as Zena Sherman, Louis' on-again, off-again girlfriend. Audiences had no idea the two actors playing a couple on screen were already a real one off-screen, quietly building a life together that the public hadn't been let in on yet. In January of 1982, after 11 years as a couple, DeVito and Perlman finally married. That same year, Perlman began playing Carla Tortelli, the sharp-tongued waitress on a new NBC sitcom called Cheers, a role that would eventually earn her 4 Emmy Awards and make her one of the most recognizable comedic actresses on American television. DeVito, by then a known quantity from Taxi, watched his wife's career take off in its own direction, and by most accounts took genuine pride in it rather than feeling overshadowed by her growing fame. The two of them weren't content to simply act in other people's projects. In 1991, DeVito teamed up with producer Michael Shamberg to found Jersey Films, later bringing on producer Stacy Shea as an equal partner, and the company quickly became one of the more influential independent production outfits in American film. Their most famous gamble came when a relatively unknown filmmaker named Quentin Tarantino, fresh off the cult success of Reservoir Dogs, was introduced to the company before word of his next script existed. DeVito has said he was sold less on the pitch itself and more on Tarantino's energy in the room, recalling that he made the deal almost on instinct, without having seen Reservoir Dogs or knowing exactly what the new project would even become. Jersey Films struck a development deal worth roughly $1 million, providing both early financing and office space for Tarantino's fledgling production company, when other studios eventually passed on the script for being too dark. The film eventually found its home at Miramax, was shot for around $8 million, and went on to gross well over $200 million worldwide, launching or reviving the careers of nearly everyone attached to it, from John Travolta to Samuel L. Jackson. It remains one of the more striking examples of DeVito's eye for talent, an instinct that also helped bring Get Shorty, Gattaca, Erin Brockovich, and Garden State into existence over the years that followed, with Erin Brockovich later earning DeVito a Best Picture Oscar nomination as one of its producers. In the middle of building that career, DeVito and Perlman were also raising 3 children: Lucy, born in 1983, Grace, born in March of 1985, and Jacob, born in October of 1987. They kept working together whenever the right project allowed it, and nowhere was that partnership more visible than in 1996, when DeVito directed, produced, and starred in Matilda, the film adaptation of Roald Dahl's novel, casting Perlman as his equally neglectful on-screen wife and even bringing his own children on board for small roles. What audiences in theaters that year didn't know was what was happening just off camera. In March of 1995, partway through filming, 8-year-old Mara Wilson, who played the title role, learned that her mother, Susie, had been diagnosed with breast cancer. DeVito and Perlman, by Wilson's own account in later interviews, became something like a second set of parents to her during that stretch, inviting her over to their house, taking her to plays and movies, and doing whatever they could to give her a few hours where she didn't have to think about what was happening at home. She has said that the set felt like a family to her during one of the hardest periods of her childhood, and that DeVito greeted her with a hug every single day before filming began. Susie Wilson died on April 27, 1996, just months before the film's release. Before she passed, DeVito made sure she got to see an early cut of the movie so she could watch her daughter's performance, a gesture Wilson didn't learn about until years afterward. The finished film carries a dedication to Susie's memory, and Wilson has said she still feels a small wave of gratitude every time she sees a dedication appear in the credits. She has described DeVito as feeling like her favorite uncle during that period, a small, ordinary kindness that, for an 8-year-old losing her mother, turned out to be anything but small. For 30 years, the marriage held. Then, in October of 2012, after more than 40 years together in total, DeVito and Perlman announced they were separating. It landed as a genuine shock to a lot of people who had watched them for decades, because in an industry where high-profile relationships often dissolve quickly and publicly, theirs had always looked like proof that something steadier was possible. But the separation did not lead where everyone assumed it would. By March of 2013, only about 5 months later, a source close to the couple told People magazine simply that the two of them loved each other and always had, and they had reconciled, choosing to work through whatever had pulled them apart rather than walk away entirely. By some accounts, they went through dozens of therapy sessions together during that stretch, and DeVito reportedly rented out the same restaurant where they'd spent one of their earliest dates as a way of trying to rebuild what had slipped. They stayed together for another 4 years before separating again in March of 2017. And this time, the split held. But here is the detail that makes their story unusual. They never filed for divorce. Not after the first separation, not after the second, not in all the years since. Perlman has been candid, without going into specifics, about how difficult that period actually was. Speaking years later on Julia Louis-Dreyfus's podcast Wiser Than Me, she said plainly that she wasn't going to sugarcoat it, that the early days of the split were genuinely hard, and that there had been more than one reason behind why they ultimately separated. She acknowledged that both of them were deeply consumed by their careers, that he loved to work and so did she, and that some of the rest belonged to them, and not to the public. When Perlman has been asked directly why they never made it official, her answers have had a kind of plain, unbothered honesty to them. Speaking with Andy Cohen on Watch What Happens Live in 2019, she was asked outright whether the two of them would ever divorce, and she responded as though the question itself didn't quite make sense to her, simply asking what the point would even be. In 2022, reflecting on the life they'd built apart, she said something that captured the strangeness and the comfort of their arrangement at once, noting that she sometimes missed the years when they lived under one roof, but that the life they had now carried its own kind of meaning, just a different kind. Perlman has also spoken about how much they still have in common even living separately, telling interviewers that they agree on most of what matters, and that the family has remained the most important thing to both of them, married or not. By 2024, when DeVito spoke with Fox News Digital while promoting a new film, the picture he painted was of two people who had simply rearranged the shape of their relationship rather than ended it. He described sharing a new grandchild, attending a family birthday party together just the day before the interview, and talking with Perlman constantly. At one point, trying to explain how they had managed to stay so connected for so long, he said that they had met back in 1970, slightly misremembering the actual date by a year, and that after that much time together, you simply learn how the other person is feeling without needing to ask. He talked about daily conversations, about doing things together as a family, about watching his daughters become mothers themselves and trying not to hover too much while they figured it out. He also mentioned having recently taken a full week-long family vacation together, the whole extended group under one roof for a stretch, which is not exactly the picture most people imagine when they hear the word separated. None of it sounded like a man describing an ex-wife. It sounded like a man describing the center of his life. DeVito is still working at 81. Still playing the gleefully unhinged Frank Reynolds on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, a role he joined back in 2006 and has never left, on a show that has now run for nearly 2 decades and remains one of the longest-running live-action sitcoms in American television history. He still produces, including newer projects developed alongside his own grown children. He still shows up for premieres, for birthdays, for the kind of ordinary family milestones that don't make headlines but apparently matter more to him than most of the awards on his shelf. And Rhea Perlman, who once forgot entirely why she had walked into a small theater on a January night more than 50 years ago because she couldn't look away from the man on the stage, is still in his life in nearly every way that counts, just not under the same roof. They still own homes near one another. They still see their grandchildren together. By every account either of them has given publicly, the version of family they built has simply outlasted the version of marriage other people expected them to keep. There is no tidy lesson at the end of a story like this, no neat bow to tie it off with. Two people met young, built careers side by side, raised 3 children, separated, came back together, separated again, and somehow never let go of each other completely. They are not married in the conventional sense most people imagine when they hear the word living together, sharing a single address, but they are also clearly not divorced in any sense that matters to either of them. Whatever this is, it has lasted longer than most conventional marriages do, and it has done so without either of them pretending it was simple. Maybe that's the part of the story actually worth sitting with. Not the question of whether two people stayed together in the way Hollywood usually defines staying together, but whether the form a relationship takes even matters. As long as the two people inside it still recognize each other after 50 years, still pick up the phone, still show up for the birthday party the day before a stranger from a magazine asks how they are doing. A 4-foot 10-inch kid from a Jersey Shore boardwalk who was once told plainly that he hadn't been wanted spent the rest of his life being chosen, over and over, by the one person who saw something in him before the rest of the world ever did. Danny DeVito met Rhea Perlman on a cold January night in